Welcome to Baseball and Coffee, episode 46 with Tino and Aaron. What's up, Aaron?
Not too much. Enjoying play of baseball.
You got your Guardians hat on, I see.
I do. Yeah, I'm hoping for a couple more Stephen Kwan hits and a little bit more late inning magic.
Right on. Right on, man. So this episode, we're going to uh, talk a little bit about some of the stats and metrics that we use, or maybe how our interpretation of those stats or metrics have changed over the course of the year, how we use them, how we use them, what skills we're using them to evaluate. And we'll talk a little bit about the postseason and whether our fantasy teams impact how we watch the postseason or how we feel about the postseason. And then a little bit of a league championship series discussion, open forum, and if we have time cards as well. What's going
Great.
on, man?
I don't have really interesting coffee stories. I really haven't been out to any new shops or anything. I would say as the weather has cooled, I found I've stopped a lot on the way home just to get a short hot chocolate, just to have something warm to sip on.
Right.
Because when I come out of work in the morning, it's been super chilly.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't have coffee, or messes with my sleep. But so that's been the thing of late, which is not really coffee per se, but I just really enjoyed that of late with the cooler weather.
Mm-hmm.
Rather non-coffee type pumpkin thing. I know a lot of people like pumpkin lattes. It's not my thing, but I've got boring with my workout smoothies. I found this pumpkin spice smoothie that I've really been digging on.
Nice.
Again, not coffee related, but coffee tangential. So I don't have anything super coffee centric today.
Well, my I guess coffee anecdote is not about flavor of coffee as much as it is kind of. So I typically go to I alternate between going to my supermarket and buying Walla Walla roastery coffee, which is local, or buying it from the roastery itself. And I often feel conflicted in getting it from the grocery store because I understand that the margin that that Walla Walla Roastery would get on me buying a bag of coffee from them is larger than the margin that they receive from me buying it through, say, an Albertsons, right? And and so when I went to buy coffee this weekend, uh, Albertsons actually wasn't carrying it anymore, and I think they haven't been carrying it for a little while now. And so it brought me to just the thought of, my own convenience of, because Albertsons is closer to me than the roastery is, my own convenience of being able to buy coffee, especially 3/4 of a pound of coffee for cheaper than a pound of coffee at the roastery. But the roastery coffee is going to be more fresh, slightly more expensive, and knowing that the money is going directly into the pocket of a local owner versus less fresh, closer to home, into the pocket of a big conglomerate, right? Albertsons is actually now going to become Kroger. They're not changing. I don't know if they're changing the name, but I think Kroger bought out Albertsons. Anyways, point being, the internal conversation of convenience and cheapness versus contributing local and a little bit more fresh. I know that there are people who fall extreme on one side or the other. I happen to fall a little bit more in the middle, but because
Same.
the margin with coffee, especially a small roaster, as a business, as I know, is so small, right? That it's hard to operate a small coffee shop in this day and age. It just is, and make a living. So I'm trying to get myself, after this conversation, to commit to buying my coffee directly from the roastery from this point forward. But it just brought up a really interesting conversation that applies to a lot of businesses, but is one that I know a little bit more intimately because of my time in coffee. It forced me to think a little bit,
Right.
which I actually appreciated.
Yeah, I appreciate the conscientiousness around that. I think we go through that with a lot of things we buy. If we are more intentional about what we're buying and who it benefits, I think that would be a good thing.
Right.
RP wise.
All right, let's dig in a little bit to some of these stats. Is your, I guess, is your interpretation of the question the same as the way that I explained it?
Yeah, I think so for sure.
Okay. So let's start with, why don't you start us off with a stat that you have an opinion on?
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about expected stats, specifically batting average and slugging. Um, I think a couple of reasons I will be using this stat less. I guess first of all, the way I would use this in the past, or the way I've analyzed this in the past, is to try to, if I see a player over or underperforming what I expect based on his talent or the way I view him as a hitter, it's a way to look at it and see, is luck or batted ball luck playing a role in the stats or the performance being different than what I would expect. So that's the way I've sort of used it. However, don't anticipate I'll be using it the same way moving forward. I had kind of an eye-opening um, just revelation with it because I one of the things I was doing towards the end of the year was really analyzing every at bat for my players and who I rostered. And what, I was doing that by watching the at bat on Savant. You can actually watch the sequence of pitches and then when the ball is in play, it will give you an expected batting average on that particular strike or that particular hit. And I saw a lot of balls that I would consider weak contact have a high expected batting average, and balls that I thought were hit really hard have a very medium or lower than I'd expected batting average. And so it really undermined my impression of that stat, which I thought it was a lot more about how hard they hit the ball, and the angles. And so it doesn't take into account. So, say someone who kind of hits a bloop at the shortstop, it knows that there is that sort of dead space depending on how deep the outfield plays, where a blooper can drop in. So it just basically that firsthand experience of seeing an individual hit of where I perceive that as a well struck ball or not still have a high expected batting average. Um, it really changed the way I will look at that stat. And then the other reason is we have a rule change going next year. It's going to introduce the variability in terms of the shift and defensive alignment. It's really going to impact. Um, I think there's a potential for it to really impact batting average and on balls in play as well. So that with that factor as well, I think it'll take time for those expected stats to adjust. Um, and so it's definitely a stat I'll be leaning away from.
Mhm. I fall in the same camp, I think, for maybe some slightly different reasons, but I've essentially stopped using expected stats. I did look at them before the season started. Uh, one of those moves was because, or one of the reasons why was because we understood that the ball didn't travel the same way in 22 as it did in 21. And so people kind of waited for some of those X stats to normalize because they were using formulas that were based on a more livelier ball. But the reality is that an expected stat is still kind of a combination of a whole bunch of smaller factors or variables, right? And so if you look at a player's, expected batting average, say it's 50 points higher than what the actual batting average was, I think it's more impactful to just dig deeper into the player to see why that expected batting average was higher, right? Was it it could be batting average of balls in play, it could be exit velocity, it could be the direction that they hit the ball, it could be, you could name off a million reasons as to why that number is lower than what they expected. But I'd rather know on a micro level, kind of drill down as far as possible, what is it that's impacting this player? And more importantly, is this luck or is this something that a player can actually control and fix, especially in the off season? Um, Tied into that and to your comment about the shift rules changing, one of the metrics that I have down on my list is to pay less attention to moving forward is pull percentage, and especially pull percentage on ground balls, because as it stands now, obviously you would have three infielders on one side of the field, meaning if you have a hitter that pulls ground balls all the time, and is not trying to go opposite field, and you move three, sometimes even four fielders to that side of the infield, obviously their ability to get base hits through the infield is greatly reduced. Now, if you have to have two infielders on each side of the bag, a player who hits 50% of their ground balls to one side, or say 70% of their ground balls to one side, now doesn't have that same disadvantage. So I'm looking for more dead pull hitters to potentially hit for a higher average than they have in previous years because of that rule change. But yeah, I think for, again, to your point about X stats, it's not something that I've really been looking at, I'd say, for the last probably 2/3 of the season. And moving forward, unless I know exactly what exactly goes into that expected batting average or expected slugging stat on a particular site, I'm more apt to dig further into the player. The one way that I do think it is of value is it's an easy kind of rudimentary flag for me to dig into that player. It's not accepting the X stat at face value, but it might be to say that there might be some sort of anomaly within their statistics that's worth examining, right?
Yeah. And I think going back to a theme that we've talked about, I think the last couple of months, going back to like what's on the back of the baseball card and what is the player's true talent. And I think starting with that point of like, what kind of hitter do you perceive this player to be? And then how are they performing? And then, as you said, if the X stats differ from that, was there really a story there, or was it just noise? Because a lot of times you could be digging up over something that really isn't anything other than just a blip or a slump or just some bad luck.
Right. So one stat that I measured, at least I measured within my database that I created before the season started, that I will be looking at a lot less is surprisingly is spin rate for pitchers.
Okay.
Spin rate was something that I tracked pretty closely heading into 22, and to me means less heading into 23. A couple reasons why. One is that we talk about high spin rate because of the rise of the high fastball, right? And a high spin rate on a fastball that's thrown high in the zone induces tons of swing and miss. We talk about spin rate for sliders specifically, right? Because that just creates a better pitch, right? It creates a more of a swing and miss pitch the majority of the time. So a Dustin May or a Jackson Jobe or some of those guys that are kind of 3,000 plus RPMs on a slider, that's a it's a great baseline to start with in terms of the effectiveness of that particular pitch. However, what I think isn't talked about enough, and what I think we'll start to see more is, a lack of spin means that the ball is going to sink in the same way that spin creates movement. And so a good sinker baller or a pitcher who features a two-seam fastball more than a four-seam fastball, or even features a two-seam fastball at the same kind of rate as a four-seamer, is going to want less spin on that two-seam in order for it to move downwards, right? So you look at a pitcher like George Kirby, who we all know was highly effective in 2022, and his spin rate on his fastball was in the 36th percentile, and his spin rate on his curveball was in the 12th percentile, right? So at first glance, you think, well, how good is his stuff? If you're just equating spin rate with stuff, which I think people often do. What that led me to, or the conclusion that it led me to, is not that spin rate isn't important, but it's that there are so many different ways to create an effective pitcher, especially if an effective starting pitcher. And with Kirby, he has very good stuff. I wouldn't say he has elite stuff. I would say he has very good stuff, but what's elite about Kirby is his command. And so he had a 4.1% walk rate in 2022 as a rookie starting pitcher, which ranked in the 96th percentile of all starting pitchers. All of this is to say that command for me, especially when building a larger fantasy baseball starting staff, command is much more important to me than say taking a chance on a starting pitcher with the high spin rate, right? Whereas maybe in 2022, I may have been looking more for the explosive stuff and trying to score the next elite starter. I think at this point, I would rather find a starter with a smaller range of outcomes that I can predict, but has command enough to keep runners off base and gives me something that and still able to strike batters out and something that I can predict a little bit more. Um, but it was interesting because I was looking back at my database and I saw the amount of work that I put into tracking spin rate for fastball and primary breaking ball. And I just thought to myself, that's hours worth of work for a stat that I don't know that I value enough to put in a database at this particular point in time. What do you think about
Uh,
spin rate moving forward?
no, I love that. And I wonder, is his ability to command his pitches related to his, I won't say lack of spin, but lower than average spin? Because as you said, spin creates movement, whether that be downward movement or southward movement, depending on arm angle and the pitch. You know, the more movement there is, the more of a challenge there is to command and repeat that time in and time out, and know that you're going to land the ball where you want to.
I think with him, when I watch Kirby, I see tremendous movement on his pitches. I
But
think,
controlled movement, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and as an example, he started incorporating a two-seam fastball later on in the year, which proved to be an incredibly effective pitch for him. But he had almost like that Maddox type um, movement away from a left-handed hitter on the two-seam fastball, and he was able to throw it front door for strike three quite often, and a lot of strike threes that are taken by the batter because of that movement. So I think with him, especially, it's more of just an uncanny kind of repeat of mechanics. And it was why he was drafted, right? He wasn't throwing 98 coming out of Elon. He was throwing more 92, 93.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I do think that to your point, think about a Matt Brash as an example, right? Where
Right.
Matt Brash was starting, he couldn't get his slider over because it moves so much. So they sent him down and brought him back up to become an effective reliever. His
Right.
spin rate didn't change on that slider. He just kind of learned how to throw it a little bit more consistently. But it was so spinny that he literally couldn't control the pitch.
Yeah. And I think it's again, I'm not trying to at all denigrate the quality of his stuff. That was not my intent. It was
Yeah.
more just the inconsistency. I think with the slider specifically, I think a slider is the pitch that I've become, I don't say disliking of. I just pitchers that are so reliant on their slider, um, and especially in the starter.
Mm-hmm.
There are times we've all seen that we're watching the game and you can say like, oh, that was a cement mixer.
Mm-hmm.
He just didn't break it off, or he'll throw one and they'll say, oh, that was a really good one. It really had that late life, that late break, and
Mm-hmm.
they're doing it the same way each time. It's just it is a more volatile pitch, and how it snaps off at the end can be the difference between being middle and looking exactly like their fastball and then breaking away from the barrel in that last moment.
Right.
So I think it's fascinating. I think you look at spin more than I have. But I love the way you broke it down and how you're going to adjust it going forward, especially as it relates to command.
Right.
I was looking at command plus. He's already elite. Kirby was number 7, tied with Verlander,
Mm-hmm.
just a tick behind DeGrom, but he's in the top 5 or 6 or 7 starters in command in baseball already.
Mm-hmm.
So he may be an outlier just because he's super elite and not many players are going to be able to do that. But no, I think it's really fascinating. And I love that I was hoping you'd bring a pitching one because I was struggling to come up with a metric I was going to change for pitching. So that's
Mm-hmm.
great.
Cool. What's your next one?
The only one I want to talk about a little bit was other one was launch angle, and I think it's not something that I'm going to stop looking at by any means. It's a little bit different, I think, but the way I'm going to adjust or have adjusted moving forward is looking at it and not just as look at that number, make a decision to move on, but look at that number and then dig deeper. And I think first of all to see at bats actually see at bats and see, are there certain pitches where they struggle with them, or are they consistently missing on a pitch up in the zone? And then looking at the batted ball results. So looking at ground ball, line fly ball rates, pop infield fly rates, um, push a straight pull and push or opposite field hits. What does the spray chart look like? Because what I've noticed is a lot of times when guys hit into the ground, it's because they're off time. We've heard the term rollover. They're out in front of a pitch and they roll it over into the shift or roll a weak ground ball, or they are late on a pitch and they hammer it into the ground. So it's really a timing issue. And so to me, it's having a poor launch angle could be an indicator of more problems, or different types of problems other than just they don't lift the ball. Because we've all seen guys, with very few exceptions, like Yandy Diaz is probably the most famous person in terms of someone who has a very low swinging strike rate, makes a ton of hard contact, but doesn't lift the ball. I think kind of we talked about Kirby's command, like he's an outlier. Like he's someone who has documented like long track record of low launch angle. Taking those few exceptions out, I think more in the middle, and as we're evaluating players who are emerging or coming into their own, or we think that there's more development to come, for me, I'm definitely going to be continuing to look at a fuller view of what's leading maybe a less than optimal launch angle, whether that's too high or too low, to try to get a fuller picture and not just stopping with that last number, because I think I've just come to realization there's a lot more to it other than just their swing path.
Right. It's launch angle is tricky. There's a lot of, because I think there's a lot of room to, or more than any other stat for me, there's a lot of wish casting, right? It's seeing talent in a player and hoping that, Austin Meadows doesn't just hit the ball into the air over and over again, or that Byron Buxton somehow learns to, hit the ball at the optimal angle. But for me, launch angle isn't an end all as much as it is, there's a range within which I think you can quickly see a number and say, okay, that's kind of where I want it to be. This is a player I want to keep on my radar. This is a player that I'm gonna try to roster. And it's more about weeding out the extremes and understanding that there's greater risk involved in taking chances on those particular players, right? The 8-9% and or 8 and 9 degree and down, and the 20 degree and up sort of players. So kind of like we talked about earlier with some of the other stats, it's mostly a way to kind of weed out the extremes and start to find the players that you want to dig into a little bit more. But I do think that with each of these stats, as you just said, with launch angle, there's more to the story than just the first number that we find. And I think that's a good way to start to find someone that might actually be able to improve upon a particular stat or result. Another one I'd like to bring up is max exit velocity. It's something that is talked about a lot. I think it does serve a purpose. What it really does is, if you can get a max exit velocity on a young player, specifically a minor league player, there's a good chance it gives you some sort of read on what their power kind of ceiling might be, right? Because you understand they can hit the ball really hard, right? Makes sense. But at a major league level, first of all, it's only one ball, right? So all of us can get lucky once and hit a ball really hard. It's not indicative of performance over the course of a year. But really why I bring it up is, one of the things, as I've read some more and kind of dug a little more, I realized that hitting the ball out in front of the plate and being able to lift the ball when you do that is much more important than swinging hard, right? And so this was something that that's how Justin Turner built a career as a regular, was learning how to get out in front of the ball and lift it. Two players that I found that were of interest to me were Alex Bregman and Marcus Semien. Both are dead pull hitters. Both are not real physical players, right? Bregman this last year. So Bregman this last year had 23 home runs and had an 820 OPS and 656 plate appearances, which doesn't sound incredible, but given the state of offense in baseball, it is, if he was shortstop and third base eligible for you, that's pretty good performance at those positions. But his average exit was in the 48th percentile, and his max was in the 51st. His hard hit was in the 36th, and his barrel was in the 46th. He had only two of his 23 home runs were not to left or left center field. Dead pull hitter, Crawford boxes, understood how to lift the ball and place it into the stands. Simeon is even more so that way. His max exit was 63rd percentile, but his average was only 18th, right? Hard hit 22nd, barrel 41st. But here's a shortstop that had 26 home runs, 101 runs scored, 83 RBIs, and 25 stolen bases, right? So a player like that with 700 plus plate appearances, if they're able to just get out in front of the ball and yank it to left field, they're able to be effective, like super effective fantasy players. Whereas someone like Franmil Reyes might be able to hit the ball incredibly hard, and his max exit might be through the roof, but he's not going to give you statistics. So back control, ability to get out in front, some of those other things are much more important. So for me, moving forward, max exit velocity is something that I think I might look at a little bit for a minor leaguer that's coming up, if I can get some of those statistics to understand what their real power potential might be, right? The explosiveness of O'Neill Cruz or Ellie De La Cruz is seen in their max exit velocity, but it doesn't make a player like Alex Bregman or Marcus Simeon incapable of hitting 35 home runs. And I think at times we can overvalue that particular stat.
Yeah, that's great. I was looking at him, his career pull percentage is 43%, against a league average of 36. His fly ball rates for his career is average 29%. This year it's almost 33 against the MLB average of 23. So yeah, I mean, he's as you described, like that's his game. He lifts the ball in the air. And given his plate skills and his ability to, distinguish balls from strikes, he's going to be taking good swings more than not. When you're talking about a sub 20% K rate and a, extremely good not take rate, or reach rate, he doesn't reach. And his zone contact's 90%, which is ridiculous.
Do you have any other statistics you want to talk about?
No, those are my two, the XBA and the launch angle that I wanted to dig a little bit more into, because I feel like those are two last third of the season that really changed.
I've got a couple more I can go over real quickly that I don't know that they've changed as much as they just kind of been solidified for me as incredibly important. So I made Robbie Ray a priority to trade for at the beginning of 22. And he basically gave me exactly what I thought he would, which is a regression to the mean in left on base percentage, a bunch of strikeouts, and a mid threes ERA. But that's not what he did when he won the Cy Young, right? In 21, he had a 90.1% strand rate and a 2.84 ERA. And I think you can attribute part of that ERA to a kind of an outlier type extreme strand rate, which can be higher. Now, it can be higher for extreme strikeout pitchers, right? It stands to reason if you can strike batters out in the clutch, you can strand a lot of runners. And Robbie Ray certainly fit that bill, but not to that extent. This year, his strand rate was 81.2%, so it was down 8.9% over the previous year, which 81.2 is still above league average. But his ERA went up almost a full run. So ERA went up to 3.71. So to me, that's very predictive. And if you would have thought about, so strand rate for me is really important. It's important to look at it in terms of whether it's really extreme away from league average, but it's also important to see if that particular pitcher has sat in that area over the course of the last couple of years, because being able to strand runners is in part a talent, but there's also a ton of luck involved. So something for me to look for heading into 23 is sorting by strand rate, both high and low, to see if there are pitchers that were maybe overperformed who they actually are, and some of the pitchers who might be able to become put up better stats next year because of a little bit better luck. The other one that's interesting to me is, we talk a lot about K minus BB, and we talk a lot about swinging strike rate and called plus swinging strike rate. And I think CSW is becoming more popular, but I don't know if it's for all of the right reasons. For me, CSW is more a way to understand deception. And if there's a big difference in a pitcher's, say a pitcher has a high swinging strike rate, but a lower CSW, Robbie Ray is one of those, right? To me, that means that there's probably a little bit less deception on with his pitches. And so he's not able to get the same number of called strikes. Whereas a pitcher who's able to make a strike look like a ball and a ball look like a strike may have a really high CSW, but a much lower swinging strike rate, right? So I think CSW is interesting, but again, not the end all. I'll still err on the side of being able to get swinging strikes, but it's a stat that I'll pay more attention to moving into 23.
The one area I appreciate the way that Savant will break down both whiffs and then called strikes, and then they'll combine it together if you want to look at that number. I think to me, what the way I've found value in the last half of the season with called strikes is if a pitch a pitcher and has a player, and gosh, I can't talk today. If one of my pitchers has a pitch in their arsenal that they have a very low swinging strike rate, and if you see, okay, they're getting called strikes with it, like, so it's not a wasted pitch. Like, this is how they're using that pitch. So like Otani's cutter, like he will throw that pitch when he's down 2-0 as a pitch to get back in the count. He gets very few whiffs on it.
Mm-hmm.
So from a strikeout perspective, like, well, that's not a very good pitch for him, but he uses it specifically to try to get back in the count for an easy strike.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little bit of narrative to my point, which is that's the way I've come to value that stat is if they're not getting swinging strikes, are they using it to get called strikes? Sure. And how are they using it in their overall arsenal? Mm-hmm. But like you, I remain kind of on the fence of how much I really like or favor CSW.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I have a ton more, but we can keep it for another day. It's just fun to kind of talk about how our perception of stats change over the course of a season and as we mature as evaluators. I think my overall takeaway though is one other thing I'll share. And it goes into my overall takeaway. My takeaway is that I'm always trying to find outliers, and I'm trying to understand what the league average is for any particular stat or any particular position or player, right? And so one of my first exercises for 23 is to, assuming a 15-team league, right? Like TGFBI as an example. Our home league is 16, but it's easy to adjust for that.
Sure.
I want to establish the 15th player or the replacement level player for each position and each stat, right? So what does a replacement level catcher look like in a 15-team league? And then establish average statistics for that position based on like taking all the players with the minimum number of plate appearances and finding what that average statistical output is for that particular position. That for me will help me evaluate, if MJ Melendez is a potential keeper for me in our 16-team league, is he replaceable with the type of with where I'm drafting in our 15-round draft? Or is he a player worth keeping, right? Not just based on this year. Obviously, I'm looking forward and I'm expecting an increase in his statistics, but is he truly elite, or is he truly potentially above average at that position and worth keeping? Or am I keeping him because I like him, but it's silly because there are 7 or 8 players who can rank somewhere between, like, say 12 and 7 or 12 and 5 that are easily accessible. And so this exercise will help me break down some of my own biases towards players and help me make informed decisions as to whether those players are replaceable or not.
Yeah,
Um,
I love it.
but it gets back to that idea that each one of these stats, for me, it's becoming more and more of an exercise of what's the average, or what do I need to be successful at that position as a fantasy player, and then what is the extreme low and high of that particular statistic. But lots of work to be done. So let's take a quick break and we'll come back with some of our playoff talk. 2022 Major League Baseball postseason. Sad about the Mariners. Hard to re-engage for me. I'll start it with that. What are some of your takeaways or some of the things you want to discuss about the MLB playoffs so far?
Yeah, from a fantasy perspective, I was curious. I'd asked you in our thoughts for the episode where, how do you, if at all, change your evaluations of players based on the postseason? I think for me, I look at it with a very weary eye. However, if a player really excels or a player really struggles, I think it's human nature, right? It's data. It's you're experiencing a player's performance. It's hard to completely dismiss it. A couple players that kind of just display what I'm trying to share. Like look at what Trent Grisham's doing this postseason, a player that had pretty dreadful season in 2022. But however, it's hard not to argue that he's been the most important bat in the Padre lineup so far. In terms of the number of home runs and big hits he's had for that team in the postseason so far. So, I wouldn't be surprised if there are people who maybe start to buy back in on that, whereas I would be very wary to do that. Where I was in the other side of it, you have Cody Bellinger who set versus a right-handed pitcher twice in the divisional series for the Dodgers. So what does that say about how they see him and what his future may look like? So, kind of examples on both ends. Again, my tendency is to try to just push it aside because it's such a small sample. But it is information, it is data, and just curious, your thoughts on it.
So I'll read you my notes and then I'll explain. My notes for this particular question say postseason evaluations of players mean nothing to me. The game is different. The pressure is
Yeah.
greater. The pitching is better, right? You don't see a fourth and
Yes.
fifth starter. It's
Yes.
not a marathon. So the way that we approach the game in the regular season is 162 games, month after month, very little rest. How do we get to the grind? Whereas the playoffs are a sprint, right? And so you see Josh Hader went more than an inning for the first time in a long, long time. So to me, it's a very different game. It's apples and oranges. It's not indicative of what a player can do in the regular season at all, really. So I don't take anything from the performance of the players into the following regular season and then how I see them as a fantasy player. The one thing that I do, if there's anything that I take away for fantasy, it is um, how an organization views a player, right? And
Yeah.
so I think Gavin
Yeah.
Lux is a great example from last year's playoff where they wanted his bat in the lineup and he ended up playing some center field. And what that said to me was the Dodgers prioritize Lux's bat enough to play him in a position where he really hasn't played before. And that means they believe in his bat. That means that going into 22, there were some questions with Muncy and Taylor and all the glut of even Michael Bush coming up, the glut of bats that they had for the positions that Lux can play. It said to me Lux is still going to get plate appearances because the Dodgers view him that way, right? That's about the only thing I can take away from the postseason. I think that everything else is just if a pitcher is throwing at 98% in the regular season, he's going to be throwing at 100% in playoffs, right? A player who might not be clutch in the playoffs may still be relaxed in the regular season and put up great numbers. So I don't take away a ton from it. Um, I also
Do
don't.
you, I
Sorry,
mean,
go ahead.
from a pitching perspective, obviously if it's one of your guys, you're just, you're not changing anything. But if it's someone who maybe is your 14, 15 keeper, you're on the fence and they go on a deep postseason run, um, would you lean away from them at
No,
all? Just for those additional stress innings late in the year? No.
no, not really. I don't. I think that's. Um, I think there are. Okay, I take that back. If it's someone coming off of TJ, it could also be a positive that they kind of get to build, but it's too much guessing about health. I think that we have so little
Yeah.
information about how stress and innings and health impact players, and we're just
Yeah.
guessing. We're grasping at straws at that particular point in time. So no, I don't. I think there could be um, a negative impact in say Zach Wheeler going to the World Series. I roster Zach Wheeler in our home league. Will that impact whether I keep him next year? No, I don't think so.
Right. He's too good. He's too good.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was thinking about Musgrove and them advancing, and he's really looked like the best version of himself the last 2 or 3 starts after, struggling a little bit in August.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about like, man, I mean, I'm excited for him to go, but how many more innings do I want him to throw? But whereas I was kind of relieved that Glass now got through his starts and like he's done. Like
Right.
I
Right.
was really wary of them continuing to advance, and them trying to push up his pitch count in the playoffs. As you said,
Right.
guys, if they're throwing 98, they're going 100. I mean, I was like, put that guy in bubble wrap, just get him off the field.
Right.
Uh,
Well, and they're just there's so many um there's things that one can learn from playoff baseball to make you a better player, right? You could say that some of those reps um, teach you and create a better pitcher or create a better player because you're learning from them, right? And you're learning from pressure situations. So maybe if health is a metric, maybe Musgrove's health goes from a 95 to a 92 because of all the innings he's throwing in the playoffs. But if you want to take like a Madden statistic, like his awareness, right? His awareness
right.
goes from an 85 to a 95 because he just threw, 20 really clutch innings in the playoffs, right? So it's give and take. And there's too much to calculate and too much that's not concrete for me really um to really make a decision based on that, unless I guess the outlier is David Cohn throwing 100 and whatever 140 some pitches or whatever it was, or like a college pitcher in the College World Series throwing 160 pitches, right? That's the outlier that you have to pay attention to. Outside of that,
Yeah.
no. And then to
I
answer your
think the
go
other
ahead.
thing too is I thought about was, I was getting spun up about Musgrove and those guys, and I thought, well, the World Baseball Classic's coming up, and a lot of our guys are going to be participating in that.
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to downgrade those guys too? So like that's where I just had to stop spending. I'm like, this is just like you said, it's unknowable. It's variable, yes, but is it unless it's someone who's right on the edge? I
Mm-hmm.
just think it's something you just have to roll with. And I think you said that pretty well.
Honestly, along those lines of pitcher health and output, I think the pitch clock in 23 is going to have 10 times the impact of anything else, right? Is a pitcher able to maintain his effectiveness and velocity and electricity of pitches um, when he has a pitch clock instead of being able to kind of recharge between each pitch and throw at 100% each time? I think that's going to have a much greater impact on whether pitchers stay healthy and the effectiveness of their pitching based on their health than any postseason run might. That's going to be a really big variable to pay attention to early in the season. And then your other question about do I think do I watch the players that I roster or am I rooting for them? I don't know if that was a question that you asked, but I think it was implied a little bit. Uh, it's interesting because I almost my allegiance goes directly to the Mariners, and I almost stop following the players who are on my fantasy team. And it's not that I care
Okay.
any less. I just kind of, my mode switches once that season is over for me. So what I wrote was I found myself rooting for individual players like Machado, Schwarber, Castellanos, Harper, Kwan. I do roster two of those, but I think I just start rooting for players that I like. What I found in this particular postseason is I'm rooting for franchises and I'm rooting for the underdogs, right? I'm rooting against the Yankees. I have never disliked the Dodgers. I found myself rooting against the Dodgers. I'm rooting against, certainly rooting against the Astros. They all have a kind of a Death Star-ish type characteristic to them for me. Uh, there's a smugness about the Dodgers and the Astros that I think has gotten to me a little bit. I think it's karma that the Dodgers are out. It might be that I finished reading the Dodgers book by Pedro Mora about the last couple of years, and there's a lot of endearing um, stories and anecdotes in that book. But I walked away feeling like the Dodgers were just kind of too wealthy and too smart for their own good. And the Trevor Bauer signing kind of put it over the edge for me with them. Freddie Freeman signing was kind of excess and last minute, and that felt a little bit unfair as well. Despite a lot of the players on that team that I like, so seeing them go down was nice. Houston, my hatred for Houston is well documented. Um, but seeing a team like the Padres, who are literally went all in with their farm system and traded their entire farm system away a couple of different times now to get to this point, is kind of cool, right? You kind of
Yeah.
want to see them succeed. And the market isn't huge in San Diego. And so that's fun. Obviously, Cleveland with the contact hitting approach and the development of young pitchers from within is super cool, right? It's like it would be like rooting for the Mariners. And then Philly's got this like old school murderers row of hitters who are plotters and can't run. And they've had super shitty defense most of the year. Um, and they're kind of an old school 2000s team, right?
Yeah.
With a bunch of slow dudes, but they're very endearing. I'll root for them a little less because they've won a championship a little more recently than the other two teams. But I find myself rooting for the underdog, and I find myself rooting as much against those other teams as I am rooting for San Diego, Cleveland, and Philly.
Yeah. My take on the division round, I really slept on the Phillies. I was too quick to dismiss what I saw as a lack of depth in the starting rotation after Wheeler and Nola, and the lack of an elite bullpen arm, and slept on just how good and how much of a thumper of a lineup they have. And that's really what they did to the Braves. They got to Fried and they got to Morton with their power, and really mitigated their weakness in the bullpen. And those two guys at the front, if they can throw 4 times in a 7-game series with their offense, they have a puncher's chance. And I was just guilty of not giving them enough credit for what they do. And the Astros and Mariners, to me, the Mariners were just as good as the Astros. The Astros just lasted longer. It was hard. Like every game was on a razor's edge, and it was one swing, one play each time. To me, the Mariners went toe to toe with him, and the Astros just refused to go away. I don't know what else to say. They're disappointing outcome, and I thought the Mariners played them exceptionally well. The Padres was fascinating to me, I think, because we talk about pitching a lot, and I know I was talking with Matt when they took Anderson out, and this was upfront guessing on my part. I said to Matt at the time, because he and I were texting back and forth, I said, he being Roberts is trying to get too many outs from this bullpen. I was like, it's may not bite him tonight, but it's gonna bite him eventually. And I ended up, got lucky and I was right. But the way that they're managing their starters in the playoffs, like you said, they're kind of too smart for their own good. And yeah, it was just cool to see the Padres kind of overcome. They've been kind of little brother in that in their own state and their own divisions for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought they outpitched and outhit, and I thought Melvin outmanaged Roberts pretty decisively.
Mm-hmm.
You look at what Melvin's doing; he's basically just trying to get to Suarez and Hader. Um, both of those guys are just pitching out of their minds, and he's
Mm-hmm.
trying to manage the innings to get to those two guys. And if he can do that, he has a great chance to win. And I've loved some of the things that they've done with some of they've hit sacrifices. They've done some great things on the base paths or making plays in the outfield. And I just think I really enjoyed watching the way he's managed that team.
Mm-hmm.
And really, Machado was such a big part of our TGFBI team. I definitely have a renewed sense of appreciation for him and the way he's led that team. And him, Profar and Kem, and they keep the energy in that dugout exceptionally high and
Mm-hmm.
exceptionally positive. It's a lot of fun to watch, man. Um, and yeah, and the Guardians, the one series that's to be decided, it's just such a contrast in styles. I think it was game 4 where the Guardians had like 15 hits
Mm-hmm.
and the Yankees had 5 and 3 of them were home runs. I mean, that's essentially and the 2 games they won are the games that Cole has pitched,
Mm-hmm.
who makes more money probably than the entire Guardians payroll.
Right.
So it's such a contrast in styles. It's been fascinating to watch, and I really love Francona and the way he handles that team. But it'll be fascinating to watch. I think the rainout definitely negated some of the Guardians' advantage in terms of their
Mm-hmm.
pitching depth going into today.
Mm-hmm.
But I really think it's a toss up uh, going into today. But certainly the Yankees can hit 3 more home runs and get out in front early and kind of bury him. But I think if it's a close game, you got to like Cleveland's chances to move on against the Astros. But it's been a fantastic playoff so far from my
Mm-hmm.
perspective.
So one of the questions that I had based on these playoffs is a bona fide lockdown closer, uh, do they have value, right? Because I think about um, I think so. We talked about Hader and getting to Hader and Suarez. If you get to the 8th, as it stands right now, you're feeling pretty good about your chances, right? You think about the Mariners bullpen imploding at times in the playoffs. Most everyone in the Munoz and Seawald, and they all gave up runs at some point in time, right?
Right, right.
And I think it was deflating for the Mariners
Yeah,
to experience that. And I know that the numbers say play the matchups. I get all that. This is an argument that we've all had a million times. But if you look at who's left, Class A is lockdown, right?
yeah,
Karinchak or Morgan or whoever they choose to use in the 8th have been pretty darn good.
yeah.
Philly becoming or making it to the league championship series in part because their bullpen has really stepped up.
Right.
Um, you look at Atlanta's bullpen kind of faltered a little bit.
Yeah,
The Yankees, that's part of why I doubt them a little bit, is
yeah,
we don't really know what's going on with their bullpen.
yeah,
Whereas, again, you've got Cleveland, you've got even Houston's bullpen has been pretty lights out.
yeah.
Presley is a little shaky, but is still has a couple, some great pitches, and Montero's been really great, kind of a fireman for them. So I guess what I'm asking is that confidence that this is outside the numbers, that confidence that a team might have in the bullpen, in knowing set roles, in knowing that if just get me to the 8th, right? Just get me 6 innings for my starter. We'll patch the 7th together, and then 8th and 9th, we're good. There's something, I think there's some strength that comes out of that, that the rest of the team can count on. That in the regular season might mean a little bit less. The playoffs are
Right.
more emotional. There's more energy. There's more on the line. And I think when it's that type of environment, every little thing matters more. And
No,
I saw it play
100%.
out. I saw it play out with the Mariners. I just did. And it sucked because as much as I love Munoz and Seawald, they weren't the same. They got hit in the
Yeah,
playoffs. And we won't get into into the Robbie Ray home run with uh
Oh,
with Alvarez. But yeah, I think that I like the idea of being a little bit unconventional at times, but be unconventional in the seventh, right?
yeah.
The eighth and the ninth, you got to go with your strength and what got you there. But I just found it interesting when looking at the teams that are left. That's not why they're left, but it
Right.
certainly is a contributor to their team and to their
No,
role.
I think, yeah, Class A and Hater are huge reasons why those two teams are where they are right now.
Mhm. Um, the only other thing I'll add, and I find this to be the case in a lot of years, is I also love football and basketball. And the onset of both of those seasons kind of gives me a natural opportunity to step away from baseball for a couple of days or for a couple of weeks. And it because it coincides with the playoffs and the Mariners have been so shitty for so long, I find myself a little less engaged with the baseball playoffs, um, as maybe even I want to be.
Hmm,
For you, because you're less of a fan of the other sports, do
sure.
you find that to be the case at all? That once your fantasy season is over, and if you don't have a team of extreme rooting interest, that you start to lose a little bit of interest, or are you still as engaged as ever?
I'm still as engaged as ever. However, I will say, um, and there's been seasons in the recent seasons where I've been so devastated by the end of my fantasy season, I have not watched much of the postseason
Mm-hmm.
just because I can't bear to see other teams. But that's not something I'm proud of, and it's something I wanted to change. Um, and I've been able to do that this year for sure. Was in it till the end, and am still just as engaged. And I would have missed a lot of joy if I had went down that path again because this postseason's been so good.
Sure.
But I will say in the past, I've definitely lost touch with it, but just because I was embittered by the end of my fantasy season personally.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, to your point, I don't follow those other sports very closely. I'm kind of loosely connected with football. But it's more like a social thing than anything else, just
Sure.
because so many people at work and they all watch football, and so I'll kind of like just keep my finger on the pulse just so I can say, because like knowing like, oh, that guy's a Steelers fan, or they like they like the Ravens, and I'll say, hey man, how did your team do well, or you know what I
Right.
mean? It's just like a social thing.
Right.
The game is just so different um than when I was a fan of it in my teens and 20s. There's such a, it's such a different game. And then my bandwidth is just so soaked up by baseball.
Sure.
But and yeah, I really haven't followed the NBA closely since Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, yeah, I don't know. It's been a great postseason for sure.
It has. It has. And I think the format's awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
The only thing I'd say about the format is I do wish that that the division series were actually 7 games and not 5.
Mm,
Because I think in a 7 game series, you're more likely to come out with the best team winning. And that's not to say that in these 5 game series that hasn't happened, but um, I think 7 game series is a little more fair. I also like the idea that depth matters a little bit more because that's what got these teams here in the first place. In a lot of ways, is not top end talent necessarily, but having a 1 through 26 that can play. But yeah, it's been super cool. Do you have any predictions for the league championship series?
um, I think I'm like 1 for 7 so far on our pod since we talked about this. Um, as much as I hate to say it, I'd like to see the Padres move on. I kind of wonder if the Phillies are the way they're hitting. I think the Padres have the advantage on the pitching side, but the Phillies have those two aces, and I think they just have more explosion on offense.
Mm-hmm.
The Padres really have to scrap together timely hits to score. But if it gets in the late innings, it's advantage Padres. I guess I'll go with the Phillies
Mm-hmm.
narrowly. I think they're just hitting a little bit better, and I think I like the Astros to go past whoever makes it between the Guardians and the Yankees. I think it'll be a pretty short series, honestly.
Really?
Oh yeah,
Just because the Astros are such a juggernaut?
yeah. They seem to that they're going to be rested, and there'll be a lineup through rotation, and they already go 6 or 7 deep.
I'll tell you what, Framber Valdez is so good. I I really, I've got to watch him a lot being a
Yeah.
Mariners fan, but I just, yeah, he's a buzzsaw. I think he's less hittable than Verlander is at this point in time.
Mm,
Um, and then you can't discount the Astros experience either. Uh, in my heart of hearts, I'd love to see Cleveland, San Diego. But I think Astros Phillies is more likely. Um, I do think that the San Diego Philly series is pretty much a toss up as far as I'm concerned at this point.
yeah, it's super close.
Uh-huh. You got anything else baseball wise?
No, let's do some cards.
Cool. All right.
I got a, let me turn off my blur here.
Mhm.
I still have several packs of the 2022 Chops opening day that
Awesome.
we have not broken out. We went to the Donruss and we've had the ones that Ken sent us, so I
Mm.
got quite a few of these. It's been a while since we opened these. Yeah, interesting. So a player that you and I always disagree on, uh, in a San Francisco uniform, Chris Bryant, now Colorado Rocky.
See if he ever stays healthy.
I wonder if he'll be kept.
Oh, in our league, huh? I
Yeah,
would say probably sentimentally and hoping that he gets back to where he is and not wanting to cut him and see someone else reap the benefits. So I would say it's a yes.
yeah. I another two in a row in the wrong uniform, IKF and the Rangers, blue and red.
Mm-hmm.
He's had a rough playoff. This is I have to read this one. This is opening day, Seattle Mariners.
Cool.
The Giants and Mariners punctuated the 2020 on opening day with a thriller at T-Mobile. San Francisco, which led 5-0, foreshadowed its season to come with 4 home runs. The 6-run eighth for hosts set up Jake Fraley's game-ending walk in the 10th. Seattle prevailed 8-7.
Jake Fraley.
Ramon Marquez.
Mm-hmm. Wonder if he'll ever get traded.
M squared.
Interesting player. Did you read the Dodgers book?
It's on my off-season to-do list.
The chapter on Muncy is really fascinating. I'll just say that. I got a lot of respect for him after reading that chapter.
And then finally, one of my favorite players in the last 15 years, Andrew McCutchen.
Mm-hmm. I think he lost his mojo though when he cut his hair.
He's a silly dude, man. I've seen some videos of him on the internet just being wacky. Looks like he has quite the dynamic sense of humor.
So I've got a pack of 88 Donruss. Again, thank you, Chico. It's Dan Gladden, left fielder for the championship Minnesota Twins. Tom Homer Henke. So speaking of eighth and ninth innings lockdown, Dwayne Ward and Tom Henke for the Blue Jays was a lockdown bullpen. So he had. So here are a couple years. In '86, he pitched in 63 games, 91 innings, 118 strikeouts, and 27 saves. So he
Wow.
basically went an inning and a half, 1.1, 1.2 innings per outing, and he struck out a shit ton of batters. And then in '87, 72 games, 94 innings, 2.49 ERA, and 128 strikeouts, 34 saves. 0-6 though, with 34 saves.
I feel like I had Dwayne Ward in Perfect Team recently.
I
I'll have
had
to look and
him.
see.
I had him a lot in Dynasty Baseball. He led the league in '87 with 34 saves.
I'll have to look
Interesting.
for him.
Ken Phelps of Jay Buhner fame. Ken Phelps is a good home run hitter though. All right, rated rookie John Farrell.
Hmm.
Jim Sundberg, backup catcher.
I love
Bill
those little league
Bauman,
poses.
do not remember him. First player that I don't remember in this pack. Rick Manning, fourth outfielder.
I like that old Brewers logo.
Yeah, me too. Dave Dravecki, pretty sad ending for him.
Mm.
Snapped his arm in half, basically, pitching. Mike Bilecki, kind of a journeyman pitcher, I think. I think he was a journeyman. I know that he wasn't very good. Chris Brown from the LA high school teams. From the
Oh yeah,
Crenshaw
yeah,
book.
yeah, yeah. From Crenshaw. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Jeff Stone, another fourth outfielder. Manny Hernandez. The old Astros logo with the Astrodome on there. Kind of cool. John Morris, another fourth outfielder. This is the pack of fourth outfielders. George Hendrick, right-handed slugger for the Angels. He hit 318 with the Cardinals one year, 18 home runs, also from LA. And Dwight Evans, Diamond Kings. I'll read the back. Dwight Evans at age 35 had the finest offensive season of his 15-year career, learning a new position, first base. For the first time, he hit over 300 with a 305 average and was one of the dominants in the AL, as he was second in the AL with 123 RBIs and tied for seventh in doubles with 37, tied for third in home runs with 34, and his slugging percentage of 569 ranked fourth. It's a good season. Dewey Evans. Interesting, too, that he ended up in first base because he had one of the best right field arms of his era. Thanks again, Chico. These throwback packs are a lot of fun. You got anything else?
No, enjoy the LCS and we'll talk next week.
I will, man. Absolutely. You too, brother.
All right, be well.
All right.